Oh, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Here we are, ready to go live. You wouldn't believe it if you just looked at that sudden flip of the second. But here we are, ready to go live tonight. Hope everyone is feeling good. Hope everyone is well. It is Sunday, the 6th of April, 2025. And today, I want to talk about what do you add to your compost mixes? What do you add to your compost? So we will get into that in just a moment. First of all, let's see if we've got anybody out there. Nicola is there. Evening, Richard and all. What a lovely sunny day. It's been a lovely sunny day for a few days now, hasn't it? It's been lovely. Allotted Chef is there saying good evening all. Good evening to you. What's that doing now? I can't read that. Gary is there. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to you. Kate is there. Good evening, Veg Army. Good evening to you. Scott, Seed to Table, Plot 13. Good evening, all. Good evening to you. Anna Jones. Good evening, Garners. Good evening to you. Turbo Stream. Good evening, Veg Podcasters. Good evening to you. Ballysilian Allotment Man. Good evening, all. Good evening to you. Evening, all from the evening, all from the Chilies planting seeds in the garden. What a lovely time to be doing that, I've got to say. I'm not even going to try and pronounce what Digwell has written there, but apparently it's Punjabi for good evening, fellow Veg Grower podcast viewers. Good evening to you, Digwell. Thank you for adding some culture. Jenny says, hello, everyone. Hope you are well. I've been on the plot with my gardener to get beds ready. Finally feels like I'm getting ready. Very excited. Excellent stuff. Nicola, Digwell, don't think you'll get Richard reading your Punjabi message out. No chance. No chance. Digwell says, another week of sun coming. I need a bit of rain. Oh my God, did I say that? You know what? Me and my wife have been saying exactly the same thing, funnily enough. We're walking around, both in the garden now, when on the dog's walk, and we are just seeing the ground is so dry that cracks are appearing in the clay soil. But not only that, when we're walking around, we're also seeing that rivers and streams are really, really low. We even came across a dried out pond yesterday. I'm concerned, I'll be honest with you, we had quite a wet year last year, but it feels like winter, well, was it wet? It was, but it just feels like it's been dry for too long, and this sudden sun has made things worse. Wind more than anything as well has been a bit of a problem. Anyway, and enough moaning about the weather. I don't want to moan about the weather. All I want to say is it would be nice to get some rain overnight, just to water the garden, because it is taking a lot of water time to water the garden at the moment. But water the garden and hydrate the soil. Anyway, so what we're going to be talking about tonight, what do you add to your compost? Now, this is a question that I have been playing with in my mind for quite a while. And that's because I buy multi-purpose compost quite often. And it's something that I use quite a bit of. But multi-purpose compost is just that, multi-purpose. It's good for a wide variety of uses. So to try and make it more useful, I do like to add a few ingredients. Now, if it's just seedlings, I might just add a bit of Grow More, a bit of fertilizer, basically. I like to add some brick dust, which isn't something I'm going to recommend because it may be wrong for me to recommend, but I do it because I've seen some great results adding brick dust to my compost. I'll add perlite as well. Perlite acts as like a sponge and aeration, so it's very good for that. But what do you add? And this goes on a bit further because multi-purpose compost is expensive. We're going to be looking at bulking it out, trying to make it go further. Something I'm trying this year is to even make our own multi-purpose compost. So what do you add to your compost mixes? Over on Instagram, Anna 20 has joined. Welcome along. Lovely to see you. Nicholas says we had blustery wind and rain Thursday afternoon, Friday. Friday was so hot here, so hot. We were reaching 25 degrees. Apparently, it was hotter here than in the Algarve. It was lovely, absolutely lovely, I have to say. Jenny says, I've put in another request for a nice overnight soak in. I think maybe my last request got lost in the post. Fingers crossed that works. Jenny says, wasn't lockdown spring like this? I do remember lockdown being really good sunny weather. I just don't think it was quite so dry. I could be wrong on that. I have to go look through my records, but I don't quite remember it being as dry as what we're seeing at the moment. I think we had rain overnight, or I think it's the wind more than anything that is causing the issues. The joys of Cornwall, says Digwell, with that note on the weather. Digwell says, it was, I remember because it was a year I took on the new plot. I do remember we had a nice hot spring. I do remember that. I just don't quite remember it being so dry, but I could be wrong. Rob says, good evening all. Hope you are all well. Indeed, hope you are well. Kate says, I've just got one of the big Jahona composter so I can crack on. Well, funny story. I don't know what the big Jahona composter is. Perhaps you can elaborate on that a little bit more. But I've got a hot bin that I set up yesterday for hot bin composting. Now, if you don't know what that is, basically it's meant to be a fast way of making compost. You add ingredients to it, you let it do its business, bacteria breaks it down, it gets hot, and in theory, it should produce decent compost. And you'll hear more on the podcast tomorrow about this, but basically we're having a bit of a trial. Hot bin versus Dalek is this sort of the premise. Hot bin versus Dalek. Turbo Stream says, I put some grass mulch on a bit of my plot to keep it clean, ready for the squash. Today I looked underneath and it's still very damp. So it is much of my plot under the top layer that it so is much of my plot under the top layer that is dry. Yeah, the top layer is definitely the driest area. That again tallies up with the winds. But the trouble is when we're planting our young plants, that's when we really want a damp top layer because the roots of our young plants are going to be so short, they're going to need to find moisture easily. That's the worrying side of things. Thumbs up all, says Nicola. And Digra says, evening, Brian. What conversation going on there? Turbo Stream says, 2020 was my first year on the plot. Weather was the same as now. Interesting. I just don't remember it being as dry, but I do remember it being a nice sunny spring because I was on furlough and I was enjoying every single moment, which is probably the wrong thing to say, but I was. Jenny says, I don't add anything unless it's grit for cuttings and succulents. I don't add perlite or vermiculite due to environmental issues. I may add topsoil if I want it to hold good moisture. See, I've looked into perlite and vermiculite and to find out if there are any environmental issues with it. And from what I understand, perlite and vermiculite are naturally found ingredients. Perlite, I think, is basically found in volcanic regions. So, what are your environmental concerns about perlite and vermiculite? Nathan says perlite, vermiculite, and some kind of feed, e.g., blood, fish, and bone, calcified seaweed, etc. Oh, calcified seaweed. That's one I haven't thought to add. I'm going to have to see if we can get hold of some of that and try that out. Kate says I'll be adding cardboard as well as ash from my fire and crushed eggshells. So why are you adding cardboard? Ash, I can see being good for potash, of course. In fact, during World War II, that was what people would use as their fertilizer on their tomatoes. And the crushed eggshells will, of course, add calcium to the soil and I believe makes it less desirable to slugs. But why are you adding cardboard? Rob says it has been sunny here, but still cold with the wind. Turbo Stream, on compost. I stick anything and everything in my compost bay. Weeds, kitchen scraps, tea bags, leaves, woody prunings, and grass. So this is actually Turbo Stream there is talking about actually homemade compost. What he adds to make his own homemade compost. That might be something we get into a little bit later on. At the moment, I just want to stick with the compost that we might make. That we use, or that we multi-purpose compost, or that sort of thing, what we add to it to make it useful for us. Watered my spuds today, says Rob. Indeed. Anna Jones says, I add old used compost to new compost, about a third old, 2/3 new. I never throw out used compost. Now, I don't actually do that, but I don't ever throw out used compost either. What I tend to do, when you plant loads of seed trays and you prick out your plants and you're left with a tray of compost, I actually empty all that compost into a bin, and then I will use that as a bit of a mulch around my plants later on in the year. It actually works out quite well, not just obviously seed compost, but multi-purpose compost. Perhaps when you've had a plant die after pricking it out, it just if that basically it's contaminated in some way, so I'm not going to be using it, but I don't mind putting it in a bin to use as a mulch later on. Over on Instagram, Smooth Muscle Massage has joined. Welcome along. Lovely to see you. Jenny says, Digwell, I've actually remembered a timeline correctly. Normally I get the event, but no idea when it was. I do remember it was a nice summer. That's what people really... that's one of the things that made one of the things that made lockdown bearable, wasn't it? The fact that we had such good weather. Jenny says, like Anna, I always recharge old compost unless it's for carrots. Excellent. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I am completely with you on this. I reckon it saves a fortune. Absolutely saves a fortune. Over on Instagram, my favourite ready boot manufacturer has joined. LBC Boots UK is there. Lovely to see you guys. Hope you are well. If you haven't heard of LBC Boots, I wear them all the time. Very lightweight, welly boots that are really easy to put on and off. Said time and time again, I'm size 12 shoes, so it's like a pair of canoes on the end of my feet. Nathan says, how's you, Rob, after the operation? Good question. How are you after the operation, Rob? Digwell says, good luck with the hot bin thing. In every video I've seen with people emptying them, it looks so gooey and wet. Yeah, I think the secret with the hot bin, and I think it's the same with even the Dalek compost bin, is about getting that greens and browns, wood chips, mixed in with the greens in equal quantities to stop it being so gooey and wet. But we shall see if it does work out. That's the whole point of this experiment, to see if it will work out. Jenny says they are natural, but there have been reports that they are taking too much. It is having a knock-on effect to the environment it is taken from. I guess the demand has gone up. Excuse me. That does ring a bell, actually, Jenny, talking about the perlite and the vermiculite and overuse of it. But what is an alternative to perlite or vermiculite? What could be an alternative to that? Turbo Stream says, I planted the cauliflowers and only spot watered them on planting. Only just watered them yesterday. Again, just watered around the plants yesterday. They are thriving with less water. Something I discuss on the podcast tomorrow is actually watering effectively isn't about watering daily. It's about giving them a really, really good drink once a week in order to grow decent roots. In order for the roots to go down longer makes for stronger plants. LBC Boots says, top veg grower. Thank you very much, my friend. Hope you are well. What else have we got? Digwell says, I add nothing to my bagged potting compost, as the seedling plants are not in there for long enough to affect growth. If they look like they are flagging, I just add water with a soluble feed. So you literally are not adding anything to multi-purpose compost or whatever compost you are using. You're just relying on the nutrients from the water that's already in there and the soluble stuff that you are adding. Again, this is not about right and wrong. It's about finding out what everybody does. Cardboard, says Kate, is a brown material rich in carbon, which is essential for a balanced compost mix. Improved structure and aeration, shredded cardboard helps create air pockets in the compost. Oh, so you're talking about, sorry, right, I understand this now. You're talking about, Kate, you're adding cardboard to your compost material in your compost bin in order to make compost. With you now. Sorry, I thought you were talking about multi-purpose compost and you're adding cardboard to that. She goes on to say, promoting aeration and preventing compaction, moisture absorption. Cardboard can also help retain moisture in the compost pile. Indeed, it can. Over on Instagram, Brickley Claire and Plants South W or SSW, sorry, Pots and Plants SSW has joined. Welcome along. Hope you are well. We're talking about what do you add to compost. Tab Extreme says, my leaf mold compost was a failure. I added 75% leaf mold and 25% John Innes with a bit of fish and blood and bone, probably too rich as my seeds hardly germinated. Have you got any seed compost to compare it to yet? I've saw some of that mulch converted clover peat-based compost, not adding anything to it. Scott says, what's good to add to the compost for chilies? I will be potting mine in their final pots soon. So chilies are a bit of an interesting one, actually, because chilies like the soil to dry out between watering. So if you think of where they grow naturally, they get hot weather, the soil dries out, and then all of a sudden a lot of rain comes down. That's what chilies prefer. So what I would be inclined to do is add a bit of grit, add a bit of sand to your chili mixes. That just helps with a bit of drainage, and that should help stop getting your chilies waterlogged. That's my thoughts. 1 part sand to 4 parts compost would be my sort of mix. My used compost is topping up the potato bags. Good choice. And Jenny says, I believe, and I may be wrong, but I think hot bins do best if you chop up the contents into smaller pieces. Also a good activator to get things cooking. Absolutely. But that's the same with any compost bin. If you chop it up smaller, it tends to get going quicker. That's why I run everything over with my lawnmower or through the garden shredder. And it does work. It does speed things up. It does produce a better compost. And it does work very, very well. Digwell says, I tipped out a few buckets of spent green waste compost that I used for spuds as a trial. No way can it be used as compost for the second year. Mulch only. Yeah, that I don't like to use used compost for 2 years running. I only like to use it, as I said, for mulch or what other people have said as bulking out new compost. Compost is expensive at the end of the day, and we want to try and spread that out a little bit further. Turbo Stream says the previous bags of peat-free were as bad for germination. I'm really stuck with what to use. The clover compost was £7 a bag. Compost has got expensive these days, I'm afraid to say. Very expensive. So I've got to have a swig of coffee from time to time. Anna Jones says horticulture grit is good vermiculite perlite alternative. Yeah, I've struggled to be able to find horticultural grit. You would have thought something like that would be easy to get hold of, but I've gone into garden centres and they don't seem to sell it, or not very much of it anymore anyway. Rob says, I think this is the 6th year I have used my potato compost, just adding a few bits and pieces to it, and away we go. What do you add to it? Turbo Stream says, I sowed a few things in my seed bed on the allotment as it seems to be the most reliable way for me to get anything to germinate. Digwa says to Scott, nothing with chilies, etc., just water with chili focus at every watering, bottom water only. And then aren't all compost, says Digwell, around 11 or 12p a litre. And Rob says, not too bad, thanks. Get my stitches out on Thursday, but I'm bored and still need to rest it. Of course, he had an operation recently, and we're hoping him the best. So I also like to use seed compost for my seed compost. I only ever really buy in two composts mainly. That's seed compost and multi-purpose compost. And then if I'm doing anything specific, so for my blueberries, I might buy in some ericaceous compost, or for my vanilla orchid compost and cacti compost or citrus compost. But I don't know what the difference between all these composts are. And the thing that inspired me about this question, funny enough, when I went to, we got a very good garden centre, if you can call it a garden centre. It's more of a plant nursery near us. And one of the things that they do, I went in to ask for some orchid compost last year, and they actually made it there while on site while I was there. They got a certain quantity of compost with a certain quantity of well rotted bark chippings and some other bits and pieces, mixed it all, put it all in a bag, mixed it all together, and that was my orchid compost. And this is actually something I'm looking at doing myself. So what I've done this year, obviously, I've set up a Dalek bin for the hot bin versus Dalek trial. I've got the hot bin as well. I've got a compost just for wood chip, a compost bin just for wood chip that I'm filling up with wood chip. I'm going to let that rot down as wood chip. I've got another bin for just chicken waste that I'm going to let that also rot down as chicken manure, chicken waste. And then obviously I've got worm castings from the wormery. The plan is we're going to start mixing our own compost mixes using these ingredients and maybe more, maybe perlite and things like that in the future. I'd love to know if anybody has ever done anything like that before, where you've made your own sort of compost ingredients and you've added that to mixes. What has anybody done that? I'd love to know that. Where were we? Where were we? Turbo Stream says, I did sow on the surface and cover some seeds in vermiculite rather than compost. The tomatoes didn't germinate this way. Veg Grower Podcast seeds too. It's unusual. You really are having troubles with germination this year, Turbo Stream, and I can't figure out quite what's going wrong. Is everything clean? Is everything spotlessly clean? That's another question. Chili Cake says, sorry, have my hands in compost. I buy seed compost and multi-purpose compost. The only thing I add is vermiculite, either to help with the drainage as a light topping. Yeah, vermiculite, I add perlite to a seed compost. That's the only thing I add to my seed compost is perlite. And then I do want to buy a big bag of vermiculite at some point, actually, so I can start adding that to some of my mixes too. I use spent compost from seed sowing to top up raised beds. Excellent, excellent. See, I like this. I like what everyone's talking about spent compost and what you're using that for, because that's kind of proving to me what I've been doing as well. Digwell says, I was meaning the common ones like clover and just something going on there. Jenny says, Toba, I would sow some beans into your compost and see how they germinate and grow on the leaves. Maybe there's something in your compost killing seedlings as they emerge. It is weird. And Digwell comes out, I always struggle with this word. Amniprolides, and the aminoprolids, that's it, or clophyrids. They're a type of weed killer that prevent seeds from germinating or young plants from growing. Rob says, understand, but some of the shops sell it for a lot more than they should do. Talking about compost there. Jenny says, Adam Frost did a great video last year showing different ingredients and amounts to add. He described it like a cake mix. That's exactly what I want to get to, actually, a cake mix. Because one of the other things I think I've seen Monty do as well was bracken, adding bracken to a mix. Chopped up dried bracken which was, I do have like some ferns growing in my garden, and that was one of the things I was thinking we could do with that. But anybody do anything like that? Over on Instagram, the Scottish guy that treads has joined. Lovely to see you. Hope that reads, sorry. Lovely to see you. Hope you are well. Ballycillian says, I use my homemade to top beds up and buy in McCann's multi-purpose with added peat. It's lovely stuff. Fantastic, fantastic. Instagram, Amanda Joy has joined. Amanda, lovely Amanda there. Hope you are well. The Grell's giving us a thumbs up. Turbo Stream, Jenny, my leaf mold compost was just leaves and JI, unless the leaves were contaminated. It's possible they could have been sprayed. It is possible. We don't know. We don't know. That is 3 80-litre bags for £15. Computer playing up. That's actually not a bad price. 3 80-litre bags for £15. Pretty good price, Ballycillian. Rob says, but horticulture grit has to be drug out the ground the same as peat. Same as perlite, same, I think, vermiculite. I'm not too sure or can't remember where vermiculite comes from off the top of my head. It does make us wonder what can we use instead of all these things? Ideally, what can we use that we can make ourselves? When you say JI, do you mean the formula as specified by the maker on an additive? I sowed some beetroots, says Turbo Stream, my homemade compost, and they germinated. My compost should have been okay in theory. I don't know what's going on. Don't know what is going on there. Jenny says, yes, Digwell, as you experience or something fungal, the large seeds are sometimes easier to see why things have gone wrong, except insect, or rot, burnt, chemicals, etc. Indeed. We're going back to this thing with Turbo we touched on this last week, where Turbo was struggling with germination, and we can't figure out what's going on there. Broken is a bit dodgy, if not Bracken, is a bit dodgy, if not totally dry. I only remember Monty doing it on an episode of Gardener's World. I've not really used it myself, but it's just been something I've considered. I can't remember what he used it for though. It was something he added to his compost mix. The John Innes was just John Innes, not a blend of multi-purpose compost with John Innes. Okay. Jenny says, I'll give it a go, Turbo, and with large seeds and see what happens. Anyway, right. The conversation is going down a route. So let's step this up. We've touched upon multi-purpose compost, and I think we've all worked out. But let's talk about homemade compost then. Does anybody use homemade compost to fill their pots up for their seedlings, their seeds, or even long term? I personally, I don't think I've ever used or used my homemade compost other than building soil levels up or for building or for a mulch on top of many plants. I've always been wary about using it as a multi-purpose compost because for all I know, there could be weed seeds inside that compost, and that could be a bit of a problem. That being said, I was given a load of compost last year from, I think it was Grow More, and it was their black gold, which meant basically it has worm castings inside the compost. And I placed it in my veggie pod. I noticed a load of weed seeds germinated within that compost, which gave me a bit of a concern. And this is so it can happen even with multi-purpose compost, not properly sterilized, I guess you could say. Nicholas says there's a compost company that uses bracken and sheep's wool in their compost. That is Dalesford compost, bracken and sheep's wool. That's right. If I'm planting potatoes, I add fish blood and bone and spuds galore. Indeed, indeed. Scott says, I like the idea of compost pick and mixes at garden centres where you can make your own mixes if you don't make your own ingredients for it. I like this idea as well. As I said, that garden centre was more of a plant nursery that have expanded into a garden centre. But I really did like that idea of I want some compost for this plant. They went away and they made that mix up for you there and then, which I thought actually is quite good also for keeping costs down and reducing waste. But they made that mix there and then they came back with it and said, here you go. It was expensive though, if I remember correctly. Rob says, seedlings, I just add charge, worm castings, and perlite. For seedlings, just add charge. What's charge? Charge. Turbo Storm says, I'm germinating my squash and courgettes on damp kitchen paper. I've given up. Never give up. You know I hate giving up. It doesn't word that in my vocabulary. Sorry, I don't want to hijack the chat. Don't worry, Turbo Stream. Don't worry. We're gonna get on. We got to figure this out because this is bugging me why it's not working. Nicholas says, I've loads of wood chip that has broken down from 5 large sycamore tree branches chopped 3 years ago. Horse poo will go in a compost base. Wood chip also goes in beds now like fine compost. So yeah, what I'm trying to do is just keep the wood chips separate from the chicken manure. Or if I could get horse manure, I would have a compost bin for horse manure as well. And we're just going to be trying to make our own compost mixes from that in the future. Whether it works or not, I don't know, but it's certainly something we are doing. And if you've got a large supply of wood chip, then it's well worth it. Turbo Storm says, I don't have raised beds, but use my allotment compost as a mulch on top. I'm super happy with the soil this year. Excellent, excellent. Charge is insect frass. What's insect frass now? What's insect frass? Or is that insect waste or what? You got me curious. Got me curious indeed. Right. So yeah, I really do like this idea of making our own compost mixes and making it specifically for certain plants. Like I said, with my vanilla orchids need a certain type of compost because they're naturally sort of what would you call them? Orchids are sort of found in holes in trees. That's where they tend to grow. So they're quite a weird sort of soil that they tend to need. And replicating that compost is what we're trying to do with this. Insect poo is insect frass, apparently. So I was along those lines. Interesting, indeed. Interest. Who goes around and collects it, though? That's the question. Jenny says, I don't make homemade compost. I chop and drop. Too hard for me to physically do. Chop and drop. Chop and drop. This is something that keeps coming up again. Might have to try and experiment with that and see how it works out in the future. Nicholas says, I've also got a hot compost bin. Not emptied yet. Chicken bedding goes in. Compost bins too. Sometimes with very deep water tank planters, I pot a good layer of raw material at the bottom to rot in tank. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, many of my hugelkultur beds were started with just a load of wood blocks in the bottom and then compost added on top of that. Over on Instagram, Loris2Plots has joined and Doodle Sparkle has also joined over on YouTube. Lovely to see you nonetheless. What we got? Turbo Stream says, my idea was to make a blended compost to avoid the possibility of rubbish commercial compost we all saw. Yeah, I mean, again, this is something I want to try and do, trying to be a bit more self-sufficient so that we are making our own compost I mean, we're always making our own compost material, but it'd be good to be able to get more and more self-sufficient so we don't have to buy compost in. So multi-purpose compost is a good example, because for that we would need garden waste compost, a bit of loam, a bit of basically garden soil, which is where the issue comes in with making our own multi-purpose compost, and a bit of rotted wood chips and things like that to make our own multi-purpose compost. Doodle Sparkle is waving. Digwa says easier to Google charge than to explain it. Yeah, I'll do that after, I think. Excuse me, it was a late night last night. Out with friends. I've been a bit social. In fact, this whole weekend, because I have a 3-day weekend, don't forget. But this whole weekend I've been social. A lot of late nights, and I'm not used to it. The Turbo Stream says, I have had more success with my seed bed idea, so might just accept that it's a way of germinating things. The Jiffy Sevens did work with the brassicas, to be fair. The seed beds. I mean, I like the seed bed idea, and if it works for you, there's no harm in it. Hi, Richard, says Doodle. Indeed, hello to you. Stuart Jackson, evening, Richard and Veg Army. Sorry I'm late. I mix my homemade compost with my Koya to help with water retention. I haven't even gone into Koya compost. I know there's certainly at least one person out there that cannot stand Koya compost, but I didn't even Koya compost. That's another thing that we could add to some compost and to bulk it out. Never really I thought about that, actually. Where were we? Turbo Stream says the clover I bought was Irish moss peat, so hopefully that is the answer. Indeed. Jenny says Richard has been out raving. Well, last night, yeah, friends bar. Friday night was Camera Club. We had a big event. I was on audio, and then had a committee meeting on Tuesday as well. It's all busy. Digler says, I find Koya makes things drain better, so much so that the Jiffy 7 Koya pellets are rubbish. Latest video. Indeed. Doodle says, our allotment has compost area, but it's new, so hasn't really turned yet to compost. We use packet compost and just dig it through the soil with chicken pellets, and all our seeds germinate well. Excellent. Whereabouts in the country are you, Doodle? Remind me, because I can't remember. Turbo Stream says, I'm getting old. You can't party like yesteryear. You're probably right there. Nicola says, oh, there's a conversation going on between Nicola and Rob there. Digwa says, Clover is the best compost I've ever used, followed by Mother Earth, the same company. Indeed. I haven't heard of Mother Earth, so I'm looking for that one. Nicholas says, I've managed to get some free vermiculite from Facebook Marketplace. Heating installation goes in my tubs and beds. Excellent. Doodle Sparkle says, we're in Sussex, same as me. I'm in West Sussex. I don't know which one you're in. Graham says, late tonight, good evening. I think a lot of people are late tonight. It's that sun, isn't it? It just makes you think you want to be outside gardening. It certainly makes me think that as well. Jiffy 7s are clear, but seem to dry out very quickly, though. Indeed. I've got an itchy nose today. I don't know why. What have we got? East Sussex is Doodle. Indeed. Digwell, it took some tracking down to get hold of Clover. And Stuart says, I've been using for a couple of years. It works well as long as you mix it well. Indeed. Right, I think what we're going to do now, we're just going to cut off to this week's mission video. Now, this week's mission, well, I'll play you the video, let you decide, because I'm not happy with it. Okay, so today's mission was to build a bird's house, and this is the bird's house. I'm not overly happy with it, but we will go with it nonetheless. First of all, we had to cut the wood to size. We needed 1 large piece for the back piece, 3 smaller pieces for the side and front, and 2 roof pieces. I then cut out a hole in the front piece in order to allow the birds somewhere to enter. We nailed this all together, and this is what we ended up with. Not happy at all, but it's something we can start off with. Indeed, that was the bird's house that you challenged me as a mission to make this week. I used nails. I think that was where I went wrong, using nails and using a handsaw. Didn't get good clean cuts like I usually would. And trying to hammer it together was a bit of a mistake. I should have used screws. I should have used a proper saw. I didn't. But is that a mission failed or mission accomplished? And like we did when we made the what was it, the seed trays, I think we can improve upon that in the future. Nicholas says 3.5 acres, farm field and small garden. So yes. Digger says Jiffy 7C Akoya, Jiffy 7s are Pete. Indeed. Digger also says hay fever is not something to be sneezed at. I don't suffer from hay fever. I've just got an itchy nose. I don't know why. Stuart says the bird box looks okay to me. The birds will not mind. I'm when you can do better. You just weren't feeling it, and you rushed it, and you're not happy. That was me. The birds will like it, Richard. You may get bumblebees use it as well. Mission accomplished. Thank you very much. So don't forget, we do need a mission for next week as well. But let's come back to the conversation about what do you add to your compost to mix it up. So I'm bringing it back to my multi-purpose compost that I've been using a lot for my seedlings and will probably end up being used in my pots as well. So for my seedlings, I tend to take now 8 scoops of multi-purpose compost, 1 scoop of perlite, a sprinkling of grow more, a sprinkling of mycorrhizal fungi, and some brick dust. Now, actually, brick dust might be a very interesting thing to sort of discuss. A few years ago, somebody contacted me. She was a listener. She's a supporting club member. And she said to me she's been very worried for a long time about the overuse of perlite and vermiculite, much like Jenny has said herself. So she did some research and she discovered brick dust as an alternative. Now, I tried this brick dust because she sent me a load of brick dust, and I've got to say, I noticed a huge difference. I couldn't explain it because brick dust at the end of the day is just red clay, I guess you could say, that's dry. But I noticed a huge difference in the plants that had red brick dust added to it, to the pots that didn't. So since then, I have been using a sprinkling of brick dust in all my pots. However, something I've got to be careful when I say about this, I do get sometimes a telling off because it is not designed to be used as a garden product. It is not designed, or it is not tested and trialed to be a garden product. So when I recommend the use of brick dust, I do have to be a little bit careful about the use of it. But with that sort of observation out the way, what I did observe, it does work. And my only thing is it's just a red clay powder, and that perhaps just makes it stronger roots. Stuart says, mission for next week. How about making a dibber or one for a half tray? Just a little idea. Dibber or half tray? Dibber or half tray? We got to the end of the show to decide. Like one of mine, says Digwell. Turbo Stuart says, don't know what mine are then. They do dry out low. And Stuart says, just like your one from wood. Apparently, itchy nose means you are going to get a surprise. Oh, that'd be nice. I do like a good surprise. I wonder what surprise I'm going to get. I wonder when am I going to get it as well. My 7S need watering daily. The 7Cs twice a day. I mean, I find this interesting. The difference between coir compost, sorry, itchy eye, itchy now, the coir compost and what have you. It does make a huge difference in how quickly soil dries out. I used to have a lot of respect for coir compost when I've tried it in the past, but now I'm starting to switch more into these peat-free composts that don't contain coir. I'm trying to think. Rocky Grow is one of my favorite manufacturers because they sell it locally. Heart of Eden. I did really like that Grow More Black Gold as well, which I think Charles Dowding is what's it called? Put his name behind it as well. The trouble I have with that stuff, as I said, I put it in my veggie pod to try and add some layers to the veggie pod, and then loads of weeds have germinated. And of course, I planted lettuce into that veggie pod as well. So it's very hard to work out what is what. Turbo Stream says, surprise. Thank you very much. What was it? What was it? What was it indeed? I'm trying to. Digwet says, similarly, my ginger started in compost, stays damp. The 3 in coir dry out every day. You growing ginger like myself? You growing ginger from roots, sort of thing, to try and produce your own ginger plants. I love ginger. I love growing my own ginger. Produces some really, really good plants, which I think looks stunning anyway. I use them more as a house plant, but they look stunning and are well worth growing, along with turmeric and cardamoms, of course. But I do like ginger. This is one of those interesting and different plants that we can grow. I tend to use as a house plant. Sorry, I didn't know if that made my audio weird there. I grow as a house plant because it is just perfect to grow indoors, and we get pretty decent ginger out of it. You may have seen the results end of last year, or earlier this year perhaps, when I did harvest my ginger and my turmeric. Absolutely lovely. Right, anybody else want to add anything else to what they add to compost? I was just thinking as I was trying to fill in time, what about hugelkultur? Would that be considered as you're adding something to compost? If you don't know what hugelkultur is, that is where you put wooden blocks or wooden trunks at the base in contact with the ground, and then you put, I mean, I'm being very simplifying it here. You put compost over that trunk, over that pot, that load of wood, and then the wood acts as like a sponge, and in theory it keeps the soil, the compost, hydrated. If it is going to be as dry as I suspect it will be this year, that'd be a good experiment to see how well the hugelkultur beds fare compared with everything else. Stuart says, Ginger, would you grow that in a house plant compost? Good question, actually. Very good question. I grow mine in just standard multi-purpose compost, but I did find last year we had lots of compost flies. So would a houseplant compost be any better? I don't know. Ginger comes from, I think it's the Caribbean, so it likes quite dry, sandy soil, would be my guess. Kate says, I'm about to sow some ginger. Any tips? Gratefully accepted. Are you growing ginger from a reputable source, or you're buying it from a supermarket and seeing how that works. It does work if you buy it from a supermarket and you try and plant that, but you do need to hydrate it. Pot your ginger in a water for the night before planting to try and hydrate that ginger root back up, and then plant that. It does love a lot of heat. It needs a lot of heat, a lot of sun, but it does do well. Turbo Stream says the bag multi-purpose compost seemed to be potluck, and year to year, at least with peat, you would be expecting good results most years. Yeah, we've got a lot into peat-free versus peat-based compost a lot in the past, and peat-based compost, I think it's safe to say, is better, but there are issues environmentally. I know, again, there's arguments on both sides, but yeah, peat-free is better, but should we be using it? Adrian has joined. Hi, Richard and all. Hello to you. Rob says surprise is a big bill. Yeah, don't want that. We don't want a big bill, especially if it's a tax bill as well. Digwell says if supermarkets soak it and wash it for a day to remove the growth inhibitor. Yeah. Turbo Stream says the compost flies were the main reason I made my own blend. Had a real nightmare this last winter trying to grow things over winter. Me too. Those compost flies were a real problem. And what I sort of, I tried getting those nematodes to get rid of the compost flies, which did work. That and a collection of other carnivorous plants and things like that, we did get those compost flies down. In fact, that might be a conversation. Pests, how to deal with pests. Jenny says ginger is a forest plant. I grow with multi-purpose and coir. Keep damp, not wet. Good sun, but not too direct. Indeed, exactly that. Sorry, my comment wasn't allowed, but I've seen your comment, I think. Nicholas says Digger also put baking soda in water to help break down. Oh, the ginger inhibitor. That's it. Digwell says the sundew carnivorous plant in my greenhouse is taking care of my flies. The plants are covered in them. Told you. Carnivorous plants, particularly things like the sundews, are well worth the investment. Not so much the Venus flytraps. Venus flytraps are fun and cool, but I wouldn't recommend those as anywhere near as much as I recommend the sundews with the sticky leaves, or even the pitcher plants. Graham says, got a bag of Jack's Magic and it was rubbish. I've had that in the past. I used to like Jack's Magic compost. It was really good compost, but for some reason it went downhill and I couldn't use it again. Nicholas says, I use shop bought compost for seed trays. Excellent. And Stuart says, compost flies were really bad last year, but so far this year, they have not been too bad. I've not had any compost flies, funnily enough. I've not had any compost flies. We had a few white fly on my chili plants the other day, but we dealt with those quite quickly and efficiently. So luckily that's not a problem anymore. But again, as I say, I'm using carnivorous plants as that's a better way of dealing with some of these problems. Over on Instagram, Durston Garden Products, who are manufacturers of compost themselves, have joined as well. So perhaps you can share with us a few things behind the scenes of how compost is made that we might buy from a garden centre. Digger says Venus flytrap is eating the big things like earwigs. Yep, that makes sense. I do like Venus flytraps, but yeah. Toby Stream says no compost flies in my own blend, but no seedlings either. Yeah, you really want the seedlings. I think the seedlings is better without the you want the seedlings, you don't want the bad compost. Digger says Jack's Magic is now 50% non-peat and green waste. I have heard it may soon be changing back to 100% peat based. Interesting. Stuart says, I think I will be using the molehill soil when with the compost at school after the Easter break. See, molehill soil, that's meant to be a really good form of compost that you can use. It's meant to be something you dig that up. People recommend putting it through the microwave to sterilize it, but I think it is meant to be a really good seed compost. I don't understand why, because all it's had is a mole, sorry, digging over it. I don't understand what makes it so amazing, but hey, whatever works, works. Does the molehill soil have weed seeds? I don't think it does. I think it comes from too deep in the ground, but I could be wrong on that. Right, I'm going to cut away now to this week's recipe, which this week's recipe, or what you wanted me to cook, was Scott's rhubarb barbecue sauce. So let's go see how this worked out. Okay, so today's recipe of the week is Scott's barbecue and rhubarb sauce. Now, this recipe is available on my website, and what we've got 800 grams of rhubarb, which I've harvested from outdoors, which we've just roasted in the oven until it was nice and soft, with a bit of salt and some cloves of garlic. It's been in the oven for about 10 minutes on gas mark 6, and I can tell you, this is looking absolutely lovely. Smells of that beautiful, lovely rhubarb smell. So as it's nice and soft and tender, we're just going to put it into this blender. Scott does actually say to use a stick blender, but I decided to use this blender. Oh, we've lost one. Along with 230 mils of water, and then we're just going to blend that all together until it is a nice smooth liquid, I guess you could say. Okay, I think that is nicely blended. So we're going to take this into a pan now. So the rhubarb and water mix goes into the pan. Let's try and make sure we use everything up. That's quite a bit of rhubarb, isn't it? Bit of a funny time for rhubarb at this time of year because it's got that whitish hue to it. So 45 grams, according to Scott's recipe, of apple cider vinegar also goes in. We've got some Worcestershire sauce to also go in. Tomato ketchup. A lot of paprika. A few other herbs and spices. And of course, let's not forget the most important ingredient, 315 grams of brown sugar. So we get that all in the pan, give it a good mix together and get it cooking until it is cooked. Well, I think that is just about cooked. What we want to do, see what it tastes like. Oh, that's nice. Obviously that would be cooked as a barbecue sauce on top of chicken or pork or something. And there's a subtle hint of rhubarb, some nice spice from the paprika and the chili, and just a nice bit of sweetness. That, I've got to say, I'm going to give Scott a good 10 out of 10 for that, because that is really, really nice. One that we can use quite a bit of. Right, back to the studio. Indeed, I really enjoyed that rhubarb barbecue sauce. I'm looking forward actually to this week when we're going to be eating that in a few other dishes. A lot of people have been having barbecues today, as I understand as well. Apparently barbecue season is upon us. I I haven't had a barbecue today, but I'm looking forward to doing it. Over on Instagram, Compost Club has joined. This is something I've got to get on the podcast soon to talk about the Compost Club that they run. There's something really interesting going on there, I have to say. They're fairly close to me in Lewis, but it sounds really intriguing of what they do. So coming back to the conversation, what do you add to your compost? What is everybody? Oh, lots of comments. Where were we? So Kate says, I use molehill soil and it's brilliant. What do you use it for? What do you do with molehill soil? Tell me more. Digwell says molehill soil is just ready shifted. Excellent. And TurboStream, the trouble with multi-purpose compost is you don't know what they use to make it, so it's very variable in quality. Possibly. Doodle says, all nice. Stuart Jackson says the molehill soil is really fine. That's why it's good for seed trays. Okay, so you use it for seedlings. Interesting. TurboStream says, I wonder if I would be better off sifting my allotment soil instead. There's a lot of work sifting an entire allotment. That Dick Strawbridge, I remember he made like a swing with like a soil sieve on top to try and shift lots of soil pretty quickly. A lot of work, though. A lot of work. Stuart says, no weed seeds. It's very fine and plentiful in the school field. I haven't seen our mole on the allotment for a while, actually. He used to, pop up every now and then, but I've not seen him for a while or seen any signs. Actually, you know why? It's because they put the road in. I think that scared off the moles. Digrat says, to end your comment, the trouble with non-single source multi-purpose is you don't know what they use to make it. Absolutely. Digrat says, looks nice. I have to leave the sugar out low. Yeah, I mean, the sugar is quite an important part, but it was a bit on the sweet side. But yeah, I can obviously, being diabetic, you would have to leave it out. Jenny says, looks delicious. Looked bang on that. Amazing on pork ribs. You know what? In week after, Easter weekend, Amanda's going away for a week. I've got the house to myself for a week. So pork ribs are going to have to be that week. Yeah, definitely going to have to do that. Use it for potting on, says Kate, talking about molehill soil. Nicholas says, add dates, Digwell, instead of brown sugar in barbecue sauce. Doesn't spike sugar in blood. Cool. Idaho's joined. Hello, Richard and everyone. Sorry I'm late. I hit the thumbs up when I came in. We'll let you off as you hit the thumbs up when you came in. At that point, I should just sort of ask everyone to please do give us a like, give us a follow, give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to click the notifications. You know when we go live. Turbo says, I meant sifting a small amount for sowing seeds. It's still a lot of work sifting soil, I have to say. I mean, I've done it a few times, but it is a lot of work. But if that's what you want to do, go ahead. Ginny says, I believe Sylvia Gross sourced their ingredients from the same place for consistency in their compost. I think that's very important, actually. Very important too. I think when it comes to quality control, I think being able to know where all your ingredients come from is very important. I say that as a research and development engineer. We do try and keep an eye on knowing where all our bits and pieces come from and the entire production line sort of thing. And if I was a compost maker, I would be looking at having fields of material to make our own compost with. Digwell says, Melcott just up the road from me, 100% wood fibre based composts, but at a price. Melcourt. This is one of the biggest, price is always a big issue, actually, when it comes to compost. This is something that I've often said myself. I don't mind paying, I don't know, I think nowadays I can get 2 bags of Rocket Grow for 12 quid, and I don't mind paying that. Is it 12? Maybe 14. I can't remember. Um, I don't mind paying that, but I'm in a fortunate position that I have enough money to do it. Those that don't have enough money to buy expensive composts, they're probably going to buy composts at the cheaper end of the market. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. But the trouble with, like most things, you buy cheap, you buy twice. And this is one of the things that annoys me when it comes to cheap products. Cheap, if you can produce a product cheaply, that doesn't mean it has to be a bad product. But the cheaper products, one of the things I used to use was I can't think of what it was called, but Sure Grow, that the range sold, and you could buy 10 bags. I think they were 40-litre bags. 10 bags of that for 4 bags for that, sorry, for £10, which wasn't a bad deal, but it was awful compost. It was more meant as a mulch, which it did very well at, I have to say. But as a multi-purpose compost, it was awful. Jenny says, "Oh yes, Digwell, it's not bad in price as my local, as they have an offer. If you buy 3 or more, I think it's £6 a bag. £6 a bag isn't too bad, actually." Richard, they were at a GPE. Yep, I saw them. I chatted to them. Didn't get a great conversation from her, if I'm honest with you. So that was a bit of a struggle. Unlike many of the other compost companies, I've had some really good conversations with. Lots of things going on there. About £13 in Cornwall for Melcott compost. The other trouble I find with compost, and this is something that we seem to go down that route of talking about which compost manufacturers we prefer. One of the biggest problems I have with compost is that I can find a really good manufacturer of compost, but it's not being sold in my local garden centre. And then I have to travel miles and miles to find it. That defeats the point. And then sometimes I think when there's too much choice, too many different makes of compost, it's difficult to get the right one in a garden centre. And often I think garden centres are going for the cheapest because that's what's going to sell more. People don't really want to pay top dollar for compost. Tyrate Stream says at one time you could buy composted bark compost. Not seen it in years. Perhaps there's more money in selling it as chips for mulching. I don't think I've seen it, actually. I've seen it bark chips being sold for mulching, but yeah, I don't think I've seen it composted. Oh well, I certainly didn't pay that. I'll double check later. Rob says if you sieved your allotment, you would have no drainage. You need the stones for drainage. True. Soil structure as well is very important, as are the worms and things like that. They'll create all the little holes. Turbo Stream says last year I bought compost from a big DIY chain starting with W and ended in X. It was only fit for use as a mulch. Absolutely awful stuff. Absolutely. There are some bad composts out there. Again, one of the trouble I think, like with that stuff the range sold, it was sold as a soil improver, not so much a multi-purpose compost. And I think that's a big difference between the two. In the UK, we tend to call composts the same thing, whether it's a soil improver or a mulch or potting compost. One of the things I like about the Americans particularly is that they will call multi-purpose compost, for example, potting mix, potting soil, compared to what we call compost. And compost is compost. Our homemade compost is compost, as I understand it in America. I'm sure Idaho could correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's my understanding. Stuart says, I've been buying my compost in the supermarket, 2 times 40 litres for £9.50, but the same compost in the local garden centre, £12. Actually, funny enough, that's what I found with the compost that I buy. It's £16 in the garden centre, but if I go to a farm suppliers that we know of, which we go to quite often to buy Roxy's treats in bulk, they seem to sell it at a much cheaper price. And it's the last place you expect to find it, but I'm going there all the time now for compost. Plus the comment on the Melcott bag, 2 to 4 weeks of nutrition. It's a little low, isn't it? A little low. Idaho says, when I was much younger, I was completely dedicated to making all my own compost. I just couldn't do it. It was beyond my capability. So I bought cheapest and it worked at amending. I did it, but took time. Yeah, that may be the way we have to go about it. Try and look at amending our soils and improving that. Wix was rubbish along with B&Q. Absolutely. Absolutely. I do find the own brands, because we've got a garden centre that sells its own brand compost as well. It is rubbish too. Idaho says, you are correct, Richard. I did something right. I did something right. Excellent. Excellent. Rob says someone sieved a large part of their allotment when it rained, the parts was like a skating rink. It doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me at all. One of the reasons I think we get so much flooding is because we're constantly ruining the soil structure. Sometimes digging the ground is not good. Diglet says most places call it pot and compost in bags, compost for homemade stuff. Yeah, I'm with you on that, but I think the general layman gets confused between the two. And I think we need to make more of a sign of saying it's a potting mix or potting compost as opposed to compost. Because I've known people who believe that if they make their own compost, they can use that as a multi-purpose compost, which is kind of true, but it's not at the same time. Turbo Stream says I had to drive 30 miles to source the clover compost. Hardly economical. Yeah, exactly. 30 miles. I mean, that's a long way, but that is one of the downsides. Got to make sure it is economical. Turbo Stream says sounds about right. Stuart says when I had a bad bag of compost, I emailed the company and they want us gardeners to let them know so they can correct it faster. Bonus, they give me my money back. I have to agree with that, actually. I do think when a product's bad, the company needs to know about it. This comes back to quality control I said earlier. Not every company is perfect, and when things go wrong, they need to know about it so they can improve. And I remember Nigel, Muddy Boots, going back maybe 10 years ago now, there was a spate where compost, or a particular brand of compost, was really quite bad. I can't remember what happened, but there was a lot of bad stuff. He contacted the company and he actually did a video of him finding out the truth from a couple of their representatives. And I'll never forget this video because there he was in his conservatory, the camera set up, having a bit of a pop at the compost company, and they're taking it. I'll give them their due. They were taking it. And there is Nigel sat in his slippers giving these guys hell. It was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And just goes to show how powerful social media really can be. Rob says, if I need compost, I buy a pallet load. I think that's a good way to do it, actually. And Jenny says, just looked, $4.49 for 40 litres of silver grow. That's a good price. Silver grow? That's a good price, though. Good price. Nicholas says, I think our largest retailers, B&Q and the like, are hoping we don't look closely at the label. The hope we just look at the price. I do think it is down to the price. That's what people, or they really want us to do. I think it is time that we look at your photos. And actually, we've had a lot of people posting a lot of photos this week, which is good. A lot of good stuff going on in the group. Now, first of all, Kate has spotted this little treasure amongst a spicy mint. It's a wasp, in case you can't see it. I've noticed this weekend, I've seen my first few bumblebees and ladybirds for the year, and wasps are out and about as well. Obviously, you don't want to eat a wasp, but wasps are brilliant for pollinating as well. So many people focus on bees for pollinators. There's a lot more insects than just bees that do pollinating. Chili's very happy to see this asparagus shoot. Now, they grew this asparagus from seed last year. They planted it and they were thinking they had killed it. Well, it's started to grow now. And as you can see, it's growing quite well. So they are very, very happy with that. I would be too. I love asparagus. I love growing asparagus from seed. So it is good to see life. Now, Chili Phil actually purchased this. It was something like £5.59 from his garden centre. It's got a water reservoir in it. It's got a lid. It's a brilliant little propagator that can be used for a great number of things. Absolutely brilliant. Now, Sarah was asking if a curry plant can be rescued. As you can see, it's gone a bit woody. It's looking rather old. And this can happen quite often if you don't prune back your herbs, particularly your woody herbs such as rosemary or curry plant. I like to prune mine by harvesting, but can this be rescued? My thoughts are take a cutting from the fresh new growth, easy enough to do, and give it a hard cut back. It may grow, it may not, but if you've got cuttings, you've got that to fall back on. And if both work, you've got lots more plants that you can do something with. But definitely you need to look at cutting back a bit more regularly. Steve sent in his April plot shot. I haven't made a big fuss about sending in your first of the month plot shots yet, but I think I'm going to have to remind myself to do that a little bit more. Be good to see more of your plot shots. Nathan's greenhouse is also starting to fill up rather nicely, and it's good to see. My greenhouse is looking very similar. We need more space. Beddoes has sent in some of his humour as well, and it's a cat on top of her bed saying he's fertilising it. You're welcome. If that was my garden, that cat would be chased out there by Roxy. I don't know what she would do if she ever caught a cat. I don't think she would do anything. Dean was asking about his young leeks as well. He was wondering how many leeks he had, what he needed to do, and should he just leave them. My advice would be to leave them as they are. There's probably at least 4 plants there. They're doing well. Enjoy them. And they're going to be the best tasting leeks you have ever grown. Now, please do keep sharing your photos. We really do love seeing them. You can post them in our Facebook group, send to me via social media, or email me, richard@veggroundpodcast.co.uk. That's richard@veggroundpodcast.co.uk. Let's bring that screen back over to here because I'm fussy like that. And I like to see what I am doing. What else have we got? I just saw that on there. What else have we got? Right. Oh no, I've read that one. Stuart says Dobby's, Wicks, and B&Q own brand use the compost that brands don't want. I think I've not tried Dobby's own brand, but I can imagine that probably is quite poor. The traditional gardeners on our site go from a pancake soil to a mangrove swamp. The diggers. Turbo Stream says we need a source of professional grade compost. We can get it. The trouble is, where do we store it? And this is because you could buy a huge dumpy bag, a builder's bag of compost. Where are you going to keep it? And how are you going to get it into your garden easily? That is always the question. Stuart says quality controls only check 1 bag in 10,000 bags. Depends on the company is all I would say. And I say that because the company I work for, I know this isn't compost or gardening, it's refrigeration, but we quality check every single fridge that we make. We run every single fridge with sensors to see the temperature. So quality control can be better if you're prepared to do it. Anna Jones says that was clover compost Nigel complained about. I remember the video. And there we go. I thought it might have been something like that. It was a fascinating video because I just loved the fact that he was sat there in his slippers giving those guys a hard time. Nice Propagator says Idaho, and Digwell says yes, it was. Do you remember the video as well? Chili Phil says went back and bought 3 more of those pots today in the smaller size to plant soft herbs in parsley, coriander, and basil. Which garden centre was that? Is it one of my favourites that I really miss visiting? Turbo Stream says, dig round. My allotment soil after 4 years of no dig is the best I have ever seen it. Weren't you at one point talking about going back to digging the soil though? But you've changed. You've stuck with it. Excellent stuff. What have we got? Nicholas says, Chillyville, which garden centre? Andrew, damn, just got home. Sorry to be so late. Only 10 minutes left. But Andrew, what do you add to your compost to make your compost useful? As we get into, I'm going to do a rant in a moment. So perhaps I don't know what I'm going to rant about at the moment. So I'm still working on that in my head. Can't see B&Q testing every bag of compost. Actually, I've got a rant formulating now. Chili Fields, yes, it is, Richard. Not that far to come over to it. It's not that far. No, not. I just miss that I would go to those garden centres when I was driving around for work. And one thing I do miss, I love my current job. I'm so much happier at my current job, but I do miss the travelling around and being able to visit garden centres. That's one or the only downside I have. Jenny says, did we choose a mission, dibber or seed tray? Did I miss it? Cooking, watching and typing at the same time. Now, yeah, you decide what dibber or the half seed tray. I was trying to avoid build projects because I can't get into my workshop. But up to you guys. Up to you guys. Jed the Garden Man has joined over on Instagram. Chillyfield says in excess. Nicola, yep, in excess. One of my favourite garden centres. Turbo Stream says, I nearly started to dig, but never got round to it. Excellent. Excellent. Nicholas says dibber, and Chillyfield says dibber as well. So I'm going to have to get my lathe out. I'm going to have to get my lathe out next weekend. It's not too bad. I'm busy on Friday, so Saturday is going to be a busy day. Digwell dibber. Digwell dibber. And Nicholas says, okay, thanks, Phil. Andrew Norris says, I'm so disappointed with my compost pile. It's not producing anything, and my soil so desperately needs attention. It's very clay-like, and it's hard to take my multi-cultivator over it and make any impact. Yeah, soil is dry at the moment here in the UK, and building enough compost up is something we really need to do. Stuart Jackson also says dibber. So it looks like we're going to make a dibber next week. I know there was emphasis on the Digwell dibber. I'm probably going to make my own, but Digwell, if you can send me the video link, I can see what you've made. I got a feeling I've seen your Digwell dibber video before, though. I could be wrong on that. Could be very, very wrong. Right. Well, let's get into Richard's rants. Now, I struggled this week to come up with a rant because it has been a pretty good week. The weather has been on our side despite being concerned. Oh, recipe. Yeah, don't forget the recipe. I do need an idea for the recipe. Despite the weather being dry, it's been a good week. So I had nothing to really, really rant about. Instead, what I'm going to rant about is something that we've discussed tonight. And this is something that may have ranted out before, but I've certainly complained based on the feedback that I've got from you guys in the Facebook group or in the supporters club or telling me live on this show. The one thing that I'm going to rant about today, it ties in nicely, is quality control on compost. Now, a few years ago, some of you sharing videos with me of what you found in your compost. There was bits of chopped up credit card, bricks, large lumps of branches, basically stuff that shouldn't be in there. And it was pretty severe. I mean, to find a chopped up credit card in your compost is not something you expect to find. So my rant about that is, why is that allowed to happen? Why is that permissible? Why do compost companies get away with that sort of junk being left in their compost? And I say that because we all know mistakes can happen. Nobody is perfect, and I completely understand that. But at the same time, there was so much of it a few years ago. Admittedly, in recent years, I haven't seen so many complaints. But a few years ago, there was so much of it. There was a lot of complaints about it, and I completely agreed with the complaints that were made. So quality control in compost is an important thing. We spend a lot of money on compost, a lot of money, and we need decent compost. I've said earlier that compost, I feel, is the key to good plants. The plants grow in it, their roots go around and reach in it. It is such an important part of growing your own. Compost is invaluable. But chopped up credit cards, I mean, bricks, even a brick, that was pretty shocking to find in there. But worrying at the same time. Oh, yeah, I think I said, please do come up with a recipe that you want me to cook for next week. Digress says, do your own. Mine uses a lot of Lego. I then got to go out and buy Lego. I'm trying to do this. I can do it quickly. Stuart says Digwell was yes, Digwell was for a half tray multi-hole maker. Ah, right. So you want me to make a dibber for a half seed tray? Okay, I'm with you now. Okay. Credit card bit probably came in with shredded paper. It probably did, but that doesn't mean it's acceptable at all. Digwell says, my worst bagged compost was from B&Q, full of glass and nails. Yeah, awful stuff. And Andrew says, bits of chopped up credit cards. That is rather shocking. Yeah, it was. Idaho says, Digwell, glass and nails going to take a long time to deteriorate. Yeah, exactly. And Jenny says, local green waste compost rely on people putting the right stuff in the bin. I guess they can't check each bin. Personally, I don't like green waste compost. I'm with you on that because you don't know what's gone into it, especially from local companies. Stuart, thanks to Digwell, I now use the half seed tray seed dibber. It's brilliant. Jenny says barbecue recipe? Question mark. Could be. PAS 100 standards specifies requirement for the processing of composting, selection of input materials, minimum quality composted materials, and storage, labeling, and traceability of compost products. It's like so many of these things, it's just a load of words, isn't it? It doesn't mean anything. As he says, load of old crap. It means something, but it's not necessarily strictly stuck to in some places. I spoke to the compost company when I found a piece of copper nut and glass in mine. They could not have been nicer. If we tell them, they can improve the quality. And I'm all for that. I agree. We do tell them. I often do, actually. And I have good chats at some of the events when I hear. This is why when I hear bad things from you guys, I do like going to some of these events. Glee is the best one, actually, for this. I do go to these events and I pass these messages on and I get some interesting feedback as well. Kitchen crockery, plastic glass in compost, absolutely. And kebabs, homemade burgers, etc. for the barbecue, marinades or sauces. How about a good kebab? How does that sound for next week? Digger says, stop it, I'm hungry already. How about a good kebab? Because I can't do too much. As I said, I'm away on Friday. I'm visiting another gardener, actually, my gardening friend, Lee Connolly, because we're getting ready. By the way, guys, I should tell you about this, actually. Got a few minutes left. In May, I'm spending a week traveling around the country with Lee, visiting a few school gardens. We're leaving on this Sunday. What we're going to do that Sunday, I'll tell you nearer the time more about it. But that Sunday, we're going to be doing a live stream from our hotel in Nottingham, if I remember correctly. So it's going to be slightly different, but it's going to be fun at the same time. Idaho says kebab sounds good. sounds great. I'm hungry. Okay, looks like we're going to do a kebab next week. If everyone took issue with Compost Company, they would do more to rectify. Absolutely. Stuart Jackson, anyone going to Malvern on the Friday? By the way, I'm going to have a competition, not for Malvern, for Garner's World Spring Fair. When is Malvern? Is that soon, isn't it? If anybody wants tickets for the Sunday at Spring Fair, there's a competition in tomorrow's podcast. Yeah, a lot of stuff going on. Right, it is actually, I've just seen the time. It is 7:30. So we're going to do a kebab, and we're going to make a dibber, and I'll come up with a rant. What are we going to talk about next week? What are we going to talk about next week? I tell you what. What are you doing about rainwater harvesting? What's your thoughts on rainwater harvesting? That's going to be the topic for discussion next week. Rainwater harvesting, basically water butts. Because I'm worried about how dry it has been, I think we're going to discuss that next week. So you got the idea. This I can't believe we're going into overtime now. Sorry, I have been pretty tired tonight. I did not mean to be. I tried sleeping for as long as I possibly could. Turbo Stream says yes on rainwater, so that's going to be our topic for discussion next week. Apologies for being so tired, but I think we've pulled it off nonetheless. We're going to get out of here and be back again next Sunday at 6, where we'll be bright, fresh, and ready to go. Hope everybody's enjoyed it. Hope everybody's learned something and is thinking more about making our own compost for those, especially making our own multi-purpose compost. Right, guys, you take care. I'll speak to you again next Sunday at 6. All the best.